Hey guys, I'm back! Hope you had a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays. What'd I miss? Let's check the computer and find out.
A new record!
What the fuck? Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Christened Music, where, if it's listenable, it's Christenable. I am your host, Chris Martins, and today I'm going to talk about a bunch of albums. It's a new look, eh? But before I do, I figured I'd give you guys a bit of a channel update. So if you want to skip that and how this video works and whatever, skip to this timestamp. As you can see, I moved, and that was hard to manage on top of college and whatever life threw at me in the past 4 months. But I still wanted to do this whole review thing. Problem is, it became exhausting. I realized I didn't want to do 20-minute videos on one album anymore, and I also realized no one wants to watch those, not even me. It's just too damn long, and I felt it was a bit of a trivial pursuit to put this much effort into something that no one wants to watch. Trying to figure out the mic placement. Besides, I have college to focus on and my own music I want to finish writing, but I still want to do these reviews, so, what do? And then I had an idea. Just make them shorter, dum-dum. Instead of talking about one album for 20 minutes, why not talk about it in a much more digestible 2 minutes? So that's what I'm doing now. Less writing time, less serious, less stress, and more time to actually enjoy the album. Now I know what you're thinking. This video is still very long, and I have a plan for that too. I'm going to talk about the albums I listened to in the past 3 to 4 months for 2 minutes each, and compile all of them here, ordering them from worst to best, then release the parts on TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Instagram, and all that jazz. Links down below if you want to follow all that stuff. You can watch this whole video the whole way through, or skip to the albums you want to hear me blab about. It's up to you! Thanks to the new chapters feature on YouTube, you can watch the whole video or skip to the albums you want to hear me blab about. It's really up to you. Chapters are on the timeline and in the description. Go nuts. But if you want to hear ratings and some tracks, some like from the album and some memes, you'll have to watch the whole way through. And with that, on to the show! Swans. Greed. Never thought a Swans album would be at the bottom of any list I would make, but here we are. While I don't hate this album, this is a far cry from their previous projects. This is a band that is going from simply being a fun no-wave band to being one of the greatest rock bands of all time. But, clearly there are going to be bumps in that road before we reach our final destination, if you catch my drift. Greed is clearly one of those bumps. I mean, you get this at the end, so, you know. Production is fairly pedestrian for my taste, especially compared to Filth. There's some stereo sound here and there, but that's about it. I guess it matches the simple songwriting, but when it breaks out of its shell with songs that have more going on, the production improves. Vocal mixing is a bit spotty, but everyone else sounds fine, luckily. Composition is, in a word, simple, but not necessarily in a good way. I like the pianos on this record, but I feel like everyone takes a back seat in comparison except for a couple key oases, that's a plural for Oasis, by the way, like Stupid Child and the trumpets on Money is Flesh. Structure is where problems lie, however. This album doesn't do much with album structure at all, and the song structure bugs me the most, especially the fade-outs for nearly every single song, leaving me desperately craving a big Swans finish. Lyrics are basically early Swans doing early Swans with the same melodrama, except they shoot themselves in the foot this time around. Michael Gira's vocals don't really read to me as dejected or even angry, but more bored or pretentious. Jarbo's pretty good in her appearances though. As for lyrical content, it's basically the same as Cop, but with less dejection and more a dominatrix style enjoyment of suffering, which isn't really taken in an all that interesting direction. I never thought a Swans album could be boring, especially in their exciting no-wave punk era, but this is just plain uninteresting. Greed is not completely worthless, but it takes a little extra digging to get those diamonds compared to their previous efforts up until that point. Some good tracks I will mention are Fool, Nobody, Stupid Child, and Money is Flesh, and my least favorite track is the title track, Greed. Light 5 out of 10. Next! Heart, Little Queen. Little Queen started out strong enough, but then it just faded away. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a fine album, but it had a 4-song run that was near perfect, starting with Barracuda, then it faltered hard, then recovered, which is nice. The problems start with production. As for positives, instruments are mostly clear, effects are fine as they remind me of Rumours, but with a little more in the way of using stereo sound to its advantage. For most of the album, production is fine, but on Kick It Out, and the title track in particular, the whole mix is muddy and it sounds like you're wearing earmuffs while you're listening. It's a rock album, dude. The composition of this album is fun, if a bit Led Zeppelin-y. Instruments are diverse throughout, whether you're getting a plucky traveling gypsy song or a lower, more driving rock song is dependent on where you are in the album. Speaking of which, structure is wonky to me, aside from a couple of nice transitions here and there. Album structure is pretty haphazard. Song structure is more egregious at points, just jumping from one musical idea to another. Yuck. Lyrics are fine for the most part. Ann Wilson is strong and she adds oomph, even if she is channeling Robert Plant a bit. Anne's harmonies with her sister Nancy are great as well, perfectly complementing each other. The lyrics themselves are all over the place, and there doesn't seem to be much of a cohesive story to tell, but individual songwriting is actually quite interesting. While the individual songwriting is on point, there are so many different moods on this album that it's hard to land on a unified aesthetic. Little Queen is fine, but it lacks an identity, and it just couldn't keep my attention half the time, especially from the drop-off in quality after those first 4 songs. However, on closer inspection, individual songs are the key to enjoying this album. It's not the best classic rock album from its year, but it's definitely serviceable and fun. Some good tracks are Barracuda, Love Alive, Sylvan Song, Dream of the Archer, and Say Hello, and my least favorite track is Kick It Out, decent 6 out of 10. America, self-titled. Well, I can't say for sure that America's self-titled debut is quite a soft album, and while it lacks bite in a few areas, I'm not sure bite is what America was going for on their first LP. It's a cozy record by design with good vibes aplenty. Production is fun, even though it shoots itself in the foot sometimes. The problems are mostly with vocal production, as half of it is nice and full, while the other half is not only tinny, but fighting with the instruments. Instruments which are, by the way, immaculately produced and crystal clear. Not to mention the stereo sound is great as well, especially with the acoustic guitar layering. Mwah. Speaking of guitars, this is a soft rock album through and through with its composition. Acoustic guitars are the backbone of the record, and half of these songs are straight acoustic guitar and vocals, but on the other half, drums, bongos, electric guitar, and bass make an appearance to mix things up. Album structure is, for the most part, smooth with its transitions from song to song, like some gently rolling hills. Song structure is a little more unique than the average folk song, which I appreciate as it spices up the album significantly. Lyrics incorporate some of the folk rock style that makes up this album. The 3-part harmonies are great, as are the solo Neil Young-ish vocals from Dewey Burnell. It's all great except for that close mic nasal thing on the song here. Like, yuck. As for the lyrics, this album has a mix of some cheesy, shallow songs and some deep lyricism, but you don't know which one you're going to get until you hear the songs one by one. Despite a few blemishes, America's self-titled debut is a fun record and good music to unwind to. It reminds me of a Bob Ross painting. Happy little accidents here and there, but it's a comforting listen. It's perfect for road trips in the desert with a vintage Dodge Challenger. Some good tracks are Sandman, 3 Roses, A Horse with No Name, Clarice, and Donkey Jaw, and my least favorite track would have to be Here. Decent 7 out of 10. Sepultura, Beneath the Remains. I just realized my ring light wasn't on. Yeah, I really like Beneath the Remains. It's a pretty solid thrash metal record that's kinda clunky, but still pretty fun to listen to. Production is boxed in, and it makes this album's punch slightly weaker. It's got the rock trope of vocals being too quiet and the metal trope of bass being too quiet. However, I will say that vocal production is a really nice touch to keep things interesting, and it gives more of a presence to Max Cavalera's voice with the reverb layering and panning. The composition's very thrash metal, but there's almost nothing wrong with that. Despite a non-existent bass, guitars are nice and powerful with energetic chugging and noisy, crazy solos with drums complementing that. Hold on, I'm just gonna put on my Ben Shapiro impression. Have you ever talked to someone, and let's just say they talk a mile a minute? That's basically this album's strong structure. It's got all these movements that sound pretty good together, but it's very roughly put together. Album structure isn't really much to write home about, but it doesn't really need to be anything special, I guess. I mean, it's metal songs. They're cool either way. On Beneath the Remains, Max Cavalera, my childhood hero, is lead singer and selling point of this album. He is the primal centerpiece for an album that wants to be so brutal. Speaking of brutal, the lyrics talk about the pitfalls of society in a way that the best punk albums do. The lyrics are raw and straightforward, but that simplicity is a perfect tool to rouse listeners. It's a dark message, but there's also hope that things will get better if you're a good person, and you try to improve the lives of those around you. Overall, there are gaping flaws on this record, but it's still pretty solid and there's a lot to bang your head to. Some good tracks are Beneath the Remains, Inner Self, Slaves of Pain, Lobotomy, and Primitive Future, and my least favorite track would probably be Stronger Than Hate. Decent 7 out of 10. Ohio Players, Fire. I was scared that the Ohio Players would be a one-hit wonder for a reason, meaning the lead single / title track would be the only good song on this album, but I was wrong, and I was fairly blown away. Fire is a really fun, funky album to groove and boogie to. From a production standpoint, it's a little spotty, especially with its mixing. I really wish melodies were treated a little better. However, I love how the drums sound in this record, even if everybody else is a teensy bit meh. Also, effects really have their moments, and they make this album way more interesting, especially with the more driving tracks. Speaking of driving tracks, composition has this super fun, laid back, and well, funky vibe to it. From the guitars, to the bass, to the drums, to the horns, all of it is fantastic, and the solos are even better. As for structure, they play with the meter of the songs too, which is interesting, like going from straight to swing. Sometimes it gets out of hand, but it's still pretty cool. Album structure is simple. Fun funk song, R&B ballad, in that order, repeat. That's a very linear way to balance an album, and it works. Lyrics don't have a lot to say, but they really grab your attention with the things they do say. The singers are a big help as they are super expressive with each track. Can't catch me. This really helps with that fun vibe. The lyrics are super simple and shallow, but that's kind of a good thing for this album. Lyrics give the song a bit more direction without boring listeners with long-winded themes and just letting the instruments do the work. This album was a pleasant surprise. While it's not a hidden masterpiece or anything, I had a lot of fun listening to it. This album lives up to its name for sure. Fire! Some good tracks: Fire, Together, Running from the Devil, What the Hell, and Together / Feelings. And my least favorite track would probably be I Want to Be Free. Decent 7 out of 10. Olivia Rodrigo, Sour. It's here where our story begins, with a relationship with co-star Olivia Rodrigo gone sour. I think Sour is quite the solid album. Sure, there are a few holes and missed opportunities here and there, but Sour managed to grab a tighter hold on me than I expected it would. Production is unfortunately where I see some of the problems arise. I love how Olivia Rodrigo's voice is on top, and I like how guitars and drums are treated, but I really wish this album had a little more low end. The lack of low end undercuts a few of the musical explosions of this album, and I think that's a bit of a shame. A little more low end could add that extra oomph that I feel this album desperately needs. Speaking of oomph, raw power and passion are what attracted me and many others to Olivia Rodrigo's music in the first place. While the foundation is there in the composition, this album still needs some work. Instruments are fun, but they need that last blast of power that would really tie together that punk energy. Song structure is pretty standard. Album structure is kind of clunky at first, trying to drop main themes, but it gets way better as it goes along. Speaking of themes, lyrics are a huge selling point with this album. It starts with Olivia Rodrigo's voice, whose emotion is very palpable, with both softer and harder tracks. The lyrics themselves are very, very teenage, which is to say, on the nose, angsty, a bit cheesy, and not the deepest in the world, but they're really fun, and I can still get a big emotional response from these lyrics. The anger from teenage problems, mostly about relationships, that Olivia sings about clearly comes from a real place, and I can feel that. In conclusion, this album is teen angst done very right. There are a few bumps in the road, but I hope this album sticks around in the minds of music listeners for a long time. If this is the album where she is learning the ropes of songwriting, oh boy, I cannot wait for what comes next from her. Some good tracks are Driver's License, One Step Forward, Three Steps Back, Deja Vu, Good For You, and Favorite Crime, and my least favorite track would have to be Jealousy, Jealousy. Decent 7 out of 10. And now, a little blurb on the Avalanches, Since I Left You, by Sean.
Pretty good.
This has been a little blurb on the Avalanches Since I Left You. Now let's make him mad. Billie Eilish, Happier Than Ever. I'm happy to report that Happier Than Ever is Billie Eilish's best record. It's close to her previous LP, but this new album has this humanity to it. Mixing sounds pretty nice, which isn't a surprise from Phineas. Drums and bass sound nice and clean most of the time, and this record has a warm sound. While this album has fewer bells and whistles than its predecessors from an effects standpoint, I feel that there is still adequate flash to accentuate the feeling of each song. Speaking of feeling, the instruments have a lot of it this time around, with amazing beats and fantastic analog instruments. I found album structure really put a damper on this album's strengths due to how scattered it was outside of a few well-placed transitions. But to be fair, song structure is a lot more diverse this time around, with everything from typical pop songs to spoken word pieces to the title track, which is a multi-movement song that could be up there with Bohemian Rhapsody and Jesus of Suburbia in terms of quality. Yeah, it's that good. I love it that much. Billie Eilish's vocals are similar to the quiet singing from When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go, but with a newfound emotionally charged confidence. Then there's the lyrics, which are better than ever on Happier Than Ever. She bounces between the two concepts that negatively affected her mental health the most, her quick rise to fame and her abusive ex. These songs are more focused and are some of the most powerful songs that Billie Eilish has ever written. Happier Than Ever is confident and focused and an unflinchingly, uncomfortably honest record, and I think that a lot of people will appreciate this album on account of that alone. While it's not perfect, it is a noticeable improvement and an achievement for Billie Eilish's career. Some good tracks are Billy Bossa Nova, My Future, Oxytocin, Haley's Comet, and Happier Than Ever, and my least favorite track is Goldwing. Decent 8 out of 10. Dodie, Build a Problem. Yeah, I still really like this album. I don't like it as much as I did the first time I listened to it, but Build a Problem is still incredibly solid. Production is pretty good, especially for the vibe of this album. I feel like Build a Problem is a poppy album that goes intimate, and she does that with her close-sounding vocals with a hint of reverb. It has this lo-fi, muddy sound with some high-gloss pianos and strings, and it's done in a way that makes the aesthetic of this album unique. Speaking of this album's uniqueness, composition is essentially a fusion of lo-fi pop similar to Selena Gomez, but more muted. To counter this muted sound, we get these Disney-style strings, which makes for a cool aesthetic. It's a little rough, but it has a rustic presentation that I really like. The problem is in structure, as I find the songs to be one-dimensional and too similar to each other, with the same build-ups every time. But at least this album's structure is fairly cohesive, you know. Dodie's singing voice is very meek, but it really fits into the whole subtle, relaxed vibe of this album. Lyrically, it's not as cohesive as I thought/hoped it would be, but it's still a pretty cohesive narrative focusing on Dodie's problems. whether she's causing them or suffering from them, or both. But my favorite part about Build a Problem is Dodie's witty writing style that never fails to make me smile or feel the emotions she is trying to convey. In short, don't dismiss Dodie just because she's one of those cutesy YouTubers. She packs a lyrical and musical punch that will make you feel empathy for her situation or just feel nice and relaxed. If for nothing else, stay for the clever writing. Some good tracks are Hate Myself, I Kissed Someone It Wasn't You, Rainbow, 4 Tequilas Down, and When. And my least favorite track would probably be Sorry. Strong 8 out of 10 though. Imogen, Heap, Speak for Yourself. Now we're getting into some really good music. While this album failed to live up to a godly hype in hide and seek, it's still a great record that has grown on me with repeated listens. Production is quite fun on this album. While Imogen fights to be heard alongside the instruments, it's only by a little bit. There are plenty of effects on this record and they are used perfectly, from the electronic timbre of the record to the openness of the album. It boasts the most interesting and satisfying production I have heard in a while. Composition is pretty fun as well. This is an electronic album through and through with electronic drums and a metric ton of different types of synthesizers making for a robotic sound. But this album has some guitar in there for a splash of rock instrumentation from none other than Jeff Beck. Yeah, that Jeff Beck. The structure is okay, even if it does seem like a collection of songs. My only issue is that Hide and Seek is tucked in the middle of the album, and it's a sad minimalist track that sticks out like a sore thumb compared to the more upbeat, maximal songs that use more instruments. Imogen Heap was the voice that got me interested in Speak for Yourself. Her voice is breathy and pretty without the help of a vocoder. With the vocoder, she is fantastic with her intro on Daylight Robbery, and of course, her masterpiece, Hide and Seek. Part of why that song is a masterpiece is the lyrics themselves, and the same goes for the rest of this album. And while Speak for Yourself is not defined as a relationship album, Imogen Heap writes compelling stories, mostly about relationships, however positive or sour, and it makes for a really solid album. It's a damn shame that people only know Imogen Heap and this album for what you say, that you only meant well, of course you did, because the rest of this album is pretty great. It has both what I love about 2000s pop with a bit of what I tend to roll my eyes at, but more of the former than the latter. Some good tracks are Headlock, Loose Ends, Hide and Seek, Just For Now, and The Moment I Said It, and my least favorite track is Clear the Area. Strong 8 out of 10. Michael Jackson, Thriller. Now that I've finally listened to Thriller, the most popular album of all time, I really like it. Even though I've heard most of these songs hundreds of times, this album still has surprises in store and much to enjoy. While production isn't perfect, it's still pretty damn good. I feel MJ's voice could be a teensy bit higher up in the mix, but he's still treated pretty well. I like the bit of reverb on his voice in spots as well. The rest of the instruments are also treated well with really, really lush production, effects that make them sparkle, and panning that makes things interesting. The main thing I think about when I think about Thriller's composition is peak 80s groove. This is a groovy album with the more driving tracks and is a creamy album with the slower tracks. Instruments serve to make grooves and hooks with every note they play, and as such, all these songs are super catchy. Album structure is a bit all over the place, but song structure is pop song structure done right. It is the archetype of mainstream pop music. As if you weren't convinced enough about how iconic this album truly is, let's take a look at the lyrics. Of course, Michael Jackson has his signature high voice with a nice dynamic range to fit each song. The lyrics on here are pretty amazing too. Disregarding the cheesy skit with Paul McCartney at the end of The Girl Is Mine, Thriller builds atmosphere with its lyrics and is immersive in ways I could have never thought a mainstream pop album would be. In conclusion, while I feel that Michael Jackson sort of failed in his quest to have every song on this album be a killer, I feel like he came pretty close to achieving that goal. This album is as solid as pop music can get. There is a reason why this album is the best-selling album of all time. And some good tracks are Wanna Be Starting Something, Baby Be Mine, Beat It, Billie Jean, and Human Nature. And my least favorite track is The Girl Is Mine. Strong 8 out of 10. The only rating. The only acceptable rating ever.
It's Thriller. Just buy it. Just listen to it. It will solve your life. It will solve your soul. It's, you know what, Chris, right there, up here, just insert a picture of a goat. Hopefully not an ugly picture, because this is Thriller. This is God. So it's my review for Thriller.
I'm never talking to you again.
See ya.
I don't want you to ever make eye contact with me when we go to the studio anymore, because I will throw hands.
Holy Fleetwood Mac. Rumours. Rumours was both made with love and hate, and I'm along for the ride. One of my initial detractions from this album was how many times I've heard Don't Stop and Go Your Own Way in commercials, but then I realized those songs are great too, as is the rest of this album. Production is solid with the classic 70s rock vibe with these jangly clean guitars, in-your-face drums, and clean bass. This album has a teensy bit of effect pizzazz, but outside of a stereo sound and the reverb on Gold Dust Woman, there's not much of that pizzazz, as this is more of a stripped back, folksy album. Composition is where things really get interesting. Instrumentally, it's groovy and poppy, but with feeling. Song structure is 70s folk pop and rock, complete with the dreaded, cowardly fade out that I don't like, yuck. But everyone's doing their part to make a solid album, and they're hiding something beneath that fun, poppy veneer. Album structure contributes to this with the fun pop songs at the beginning up to Songbird, and the more sincere, emotional songs beginning with The Chain to the end. Lyrically, this is not a fun pop record, but a musical argument where the band takes passive-aggressive shots at each other, guided by a trio of a light Stevie Nicks, a poised Catherine McVie, and of course, a passionate Lindsey Buckingham. Rumours really sells the stories of love lost and love regained. This band is not always jabbing at each other, but they are emotionally vulnerable with each other, and I really like that rawness pouring through. This album is a raw, emotional piece of work with some insanely catchy songs on it. It is not just an album about people experiencing the fallout of failed relationships, but an album with people actively going through said fallout. I'm surprised this album even got to tape, or that Fleetwood Mac even stayed together afterwards as long as they did, but the end product speaks for itself. Some good tracks are Secondhand News, Dreams, Go Your Own Way, The Chain, and You Make Loving Fun, and my least favorite track would be Oh Daddy. Light 9 out of 10. Kids See Ghosts, self-titled. Words of the wise. Never start your Kanye journey with Jesus is King. Big mistake. Kids See Ghosts does in 23 minutes what lesser albums fail to do in 53. It takes hold of the listener right away because each song hits so hard while doing so little. It starts with production that has super tight mixing everywhere. Both Ye and Cudi are on top and powerful, and the instruments are clear and crisp. The effects are great as well. This album effortlessly balances supernatural and grounded, all from how much reverb is used, usually on voices, which accentuates the emotional core of the album beautifully. The composition of this album is absolutely fantastic. Drums on this thing are solid. Pianos are very pretty. The beats are fantastic as well. Structure on this album is one of the strong points of Kids See Ghosts. Song structure gives West and Kanye equal share of the floor as it does any of the featured artists on here, but the real focus is album structure. The 2-minute songs at the front of this album flow together effortlessly, making for one of the best 3-track runs ever. Not to mention the matching dark moods of the longer songs on the second half. As for the performances themselves, Kanye West is as insane as ever, Balancing him out is Kid Cudi with a calming yet confident presence. Cudi's humming is also perfect for these songs like Fire. Features from Pusha T, Ty Dolla $ign, Yasin, Mos Def Bay, and Mr. Hudson fit each song perfectly. Then we get to lyrics, which sees two artists working insanely well together, and two people who have been through hell and rose above it. It is a breath of fresh air. This is an album that purposefully instills good vibes that stick with you long after your first listen. Kids See Ghosts is a short yet colorful experience with Kanye West and Kid Cudi complementing each other as well as any artist could. Some good tracks are Feel the Love, Fire, Fourth Dimension, Reborn, and Cudi Montage, and my least favorite track would be Kids See Ghosts. Decent 9 out of 10. Lingua Ignota, Caligula. Yeah, Kyrie eleison is right. Whew. Caligula is an absolute hell-raising ride from start to finish. It's dark and noisy, but it has this beautiful, relatable vulnerability to it. Mixing is a little iffy for me, particularly with the vocals, which I think should always be on top, but it does work pretty well with the noisy backgrounds as everyone's fighting to be heard and crashing together in a beautifully ugly way. Effects are great with gunshot sounding snares and reverb that gives concert hall vibes, juxtaposed by haters clipping, screaming vocals. Speaking of sound, composition is really cool. It has this nice range from strings and pianos to industrial bass hits, and I love that diversity in how it's used. While it's not perfect, structure is pretty interesting as well. Song structure is fun, each song with their own blast of catharsis. Album structure is pretty good as well, with cooldown periods to seek refuge in the horror and to regain your bearings. And it has these callbacks to add a unifying thread of cohesion throughout the album. Lyrics are a huge selling point for me. Hater's voice is something else. She has these beautiful, clean choral vocals that have a lot of body. She also has these blood-curdling growls and screams. Each song is dripping with emotion thanks to Hater's vocals. The lyrics are as dark as they are realistic. This album is about abuse and its aftermath, including the denial from anyone connected to the abuser and trying to rise above it and be strong. This album takes you through murderous highs and crushing lows, demanding an emotional response. That may be fear, or maybe even hope. Caligula is a horrifying depiction of the fallout of abuse. It is a large, intimidating monster of an album, but it showcases Hater's soul in a heartbreaking and inspiring way. If you do not fear Caligula, you will. Some good tracks are Do You Doubt Me Traitor, Butcher of the World, May Failure Be Your Noose, Fragrant Is My Many-Flowered Crown, and Spite Alone Holds Me Aloft. My least favorite track is Day of Tears and Mourning. Decent 9 out of 10. Green Day, American Idiot. Yeah, I don't get the hate for this album at all. At all. I love this album, and I've loved it for a very long time. This album was a renaissance that not only brought Green Day back from the dead, but skyrocketed them into legend status. When I look deeper into the production, however, I realize this album does some things that I don't care for. They really wanted to gun it on guitars, but it was at the cost of everyone else in the band. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but at least everyone else sounds good. Hearing this, I asked myself, why do I like this album again? And then I looked at composition and lyrics, and then it became very crystal clear. Composition is super fun and heavy. It's obviously a heavy guitar-driven record, but all of the other instruments are great as well, and it really shows that this band is a solid unit together, working as a team to make this behemoth. Structure shows a cohesion never before heard by Green Day, and few artists have even been able to pull such cohesion off. The use of contrast is incredible on this record, from track to track. The multi-movement songs flow effortlessly between movements, and it shows an insane amount of detail that went into American Idiot. Then comes lyrics, with a confident, expressive Billy Joe Armstrong taking center stage to guide us along a coming-of-age story inspired by his own life, the state of Green Day, and the state of the world at the time. And not only is it a poignant protest of the Bush administration and post-9/11 America, but it is a real, raw story that comes straight from the heart, and it shaped a generation of music fans from Chicago to Toronto, from Anaheim to the Middle East, including me. American Idiot is a record that is insanely enjoyable and powerful. Albums like these are the key to immortality for one's music career, and Green Day has done just that. Some good tracks on here are American Idiot, Jesus of Suburbia, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, and Wake Me Up When September Ends. And my least favorite track is Extraordinary Girl. Strong 9 out of 10. And now for number 1. Godspeed You Black Emperor. Lift your skinny fists like antennas to heaven. This album is absolutely amazing. Lift Your Skinny Fists is a compelling 4-movement instrumental odyssey that will take you through a gauntlet of emotions, and it gets better with each listen as you peel back more and more layers. Production is a bit disheveled like Arcade Fire's Funeral would be 4 years later, but it's still nice and clear. The only real problem is drums, and it's a small problem on one song, Storm. The rest of the instruments sound great. The layering is what makes this album work, and sound design is interesting, turning instruments I recognize into something else entirely. Speaking of instruments, this instrumental album is stacked with a fairly wide array of instruments making atmospheres. No one here is a one-trick pony, and they can go somber and sad just as much as they can go loud and extravagant. Song structure wise, this album is basically build-ups the album, and I love how meticulously the songs just build in intensity and switch between movements with their long run times. This album structure is great too. It continues each story beat beautifully from the last song. Words can barely describe what Godspeed You Black Emperor is trying to do with Lift Your Skinny Fists, but they do provide clues. It is the instruments that make up the story, and what a story it is, at least from what I interpret. It's a story of life, death, and rebirth that puts listeners in the driver's seats to fill in the details of the story right down to the very finest detail. It's not like a film score where it's a background element to advance and enhance the visual story. It's a rock album, and the world is contained in that album. Lift Your Skinny Fists is possibly the closest rock music can get to a symphony. This is not short, fun music you can throw on at a party unless your friends are really cool or really pretentious. But if you're looking for an experience from your music, this album is for you. This album is a tour de force of music, and it is an experience that I will not soon forget. The good tracks here are Static, Sleep, and Like Antennas to Heaven, and my least favorite track, even though it's still fantastic, is Storm. And I'm giving this album a strong 9 out of 10. Ooh, look, a cool transition. Thanks so much for watching, and if you like what you see, click like, click subscribe if you really liked it, and hit the bell so you never ever miss a video. Follow me on other socials in the descriptions below. See you guys awards season next week. And then later in April. Oh, and by the way, I wrote music myself that I hope comes out soon, and it sounds like...